If you want to do leaps better than your previous generation, you have to do something differently. You can't follow the same norm and hit that extreme success or break that wealth barrier if you just do what you're taught and you just do exactly what the system tells you to do. Welcome to the Her First podcast, a platform to help online business owners, coaches, and creators gain the confidence needed to build a successful business while creating a sustainable lifestyle balance. We are here to help you prioritize yourself in business and life. I'm Joanna Newton.
And I'm Michelle Puolani. In this podcast, along with the Her First Collective, you can engage in the challenges women face in business, ways to increase your impact or income online, and how to make it all work while launching, scaling, or maintaining. Spoiler, it's not about perfectionism, hustling, or a copy-paste methodology. Let's dive in.
So I've always been a little bit of a justice seeker, the kind of person who wants to stand up for the little guy, go against normal culture, and just generally seek change in our world. And sometimes I feel like in my business, I don't do enough to enact social change. My business doesn't necessarily move things forward for, people in need and people that need someone to speak up for them. But the more that I think about it, just being a financially independent female business owner is an act of rebellion in and of itself. And in today's episode, we're going to look at some of the reasons why that's the case.
I feel the same way. Sometimes I have this big vision of how I want to give back to society, the causes that I want to provide for, the ways in which I want to donate or sponsor or support. And sometimes as a small business, it doesn't always feel reasonable or manageable because you're still sometimes just trying to keep your head above water or get to a place where you're profitable. I do envision for the future of our businesses to make a much stronger impact in the community in that way and have causes that we align with and have a give back model in place as a part of the business. But one of the ways in which, of course, we can already do that is by our everyday lives, by the way that we take action, by the choices that we make, by how we're representing ourselves in our content, in our presence, in our business, how we treat people and how we react to things and what we share as a part of that. So today's conversation is all about how we are a part of that movement, so to speak, just by being us and how you can recognize it in yourself.
Yeah, and we're going to share some kind of interesting historical facts and different things that really show how just being a business owner, especially as a woman, is countercultural. It is a little bit rebellious. It does go against the sort of normal grain and normal mold. I'll say that I'm not a historian. There's a lot of information I know, but I'm kind of sharing reflections on some things that have happened in history and what that means for us today as business owners. The first thing I want to talk about is sort of the nature of our education system. So the modern American education system is literally designed to help people be successful in an industrial setting, in a factory setting. So when you think about, and this is, the nature of how our educational system was set up, it was to create people who could be successful in a factory setting. So working from 9 to 5, right? You think a typical school day is about 7 to 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours long. Being able to eat and get your lunch break in a short amount of time. What do schools have? These really short lunch breaks. Our school system honors almost people who are orderly, listen to directions, follow the rules, right? Our public school system it's not designed to create out-of-the-box thinkers, right? We reward following the lines, being in benchmark, doing what you're supposed to do. If you're an entrepreneur, you are not doing that, right? You're making your own schedule. You're setting the rules. You're doing that thing. So if you've gone the path of entrepreneur instead of 9 to 5 clock in out work, you're doing something different than what your school prepared you for.
There's so much commentary I have about our public education system. My mom was in and is in the public education system and has been for my entire life, teaching and educating. She was a resource specialist. She works in special needs and with English language learners as a whole. So I have a lot of thoughts about our public education system. We obviously are not going to talk all about that today. But there are so many ways in which we are trying to kind of just build, like we've talked about before on the podcast, this like good girl identity, this sit down, listen, pay attention, rote memorization, learn just the basics, but really don't go above and beyond that. And as someone who does have their college degree and made it through the educational system and feel like I did a pretty good job in working the educational system, it's really just built for like the Joe Blow, the typical, I don't actually know what the same term is for like your Susan or like, sorry if your name is Susan, if you're listening, but that person who just kind of moves along that status quo, that educates, gets a job, lives their life, is happy, white picket fence, like kind of like your traditional narrative. And that's okay. We're not hating on that in any way, shape, or form. It is okay to want that. It's okay to be at that level. It's okay for your friends, your family, your coworkers, or anyone in your vicinity. Like they can just live their lives. Let them do their thing. But if you are the type of person who feels like you've always been a little offbeat, maybe you're a little bit of the black sheep or the rainbow sheep in your family, or maybe you wanted to do it differently, or maybe you even have this feeling inside of you that there's something bigger, there's something different, like there's another approach. That's what we're talking about today. And we're talking about the type of person, and specifically as a female identified person or as a woman, that you are countercultural. You're going against the grain. You're choosing something unique and different that not everyone else is doing. I think the numbers, I always forget this, but I think Statista shares that it's about 0.3% of people in the United States are entrepreneurs. 0.36%. That's like such a small percentage. And when you think about it, when you're in this industry, sometimes it can feel like, oh, well, everybody's doing it. Everyone's starting a business. Everyone has a side hustle. Everyone is a coach, creator, online business owner. But realistically, that's just what we're aware of and what we're paying attention to. But we're a very small percentage of the demographic. And so when you look at our public education system as something that taught and trained us to be okay with the status quo, to have an employee mindset, the amount of us that are going in a different direction as business owners is very marginalized. It's very small.
There was a point you brought up in our episode, Michelle, of when we were talking about the Haley Bailey situation. And you brought up this idea of like, if you want to make social change, make more money, because then you can make a bigger impact. And so if you set yourself up for a regular employee life where you're working a 9 to 5 and maybe you care about social change, so you work your 9 to 5 and you also volunteer for a nonprofit or give money to a certain place, you're always going to be limited by the change you can make of what that 9 to 5 is going to allow you to. You're kind of like stuck in that world. Now, if you go make a business, make more money, and give more away or do more good or employ more people or do those things, you can make such a big impact. Because the reality is our system, our economic system, the laws of our country, all of that, they're kind of designed in a way, they will keep you in your place. Maybe you'll do a little bit better than a previous generation and a little bit better and a little bit better. But if you want to do leaps better than your previous generation, you have to do something differently. You can't follow the same norm and hit that extreme success or break that wealth barrier if you just do what you're taught and you just do exactly what the system tells you to do.
When women make more money, we have a ripple impact and effect in our communities at large. And that's why we think it's so important that women choose business ownership or some way in which they're going to increase their earning potential. Now, obviously, as an employee, you can do that. You can move up in the ranks. You can find businesses and other employers that support you in that. You could make in the hundreds of thousands. You can make in the millions. But there will always be some sort of cap because someone's deciding your pay. When you are the business owner, you might start out a little bit smaller, but then you have the potential to grow that to increase your income potential theoretically without a cap in that way. So just thinking about that, one of the influencers that I love that talks a lot about this is Rachel Rogers. Her presence, We Should All Be Millionaires, with her courses and her content and her books, is all about uplifting marginalized communities, specifically women of color, to make more money so that they have more power, so that they have more clout, so that they have more say. Because when you look at our political system, it is run essentially by money, right? If you can put money into a certain political candidate that you support that has say in this area, then that's going to make change. If you can put money into nonprofit organizations that support the things that you believe in, then they're going to be able to offer programs that deliver those. When we're talking about this, we are keeping those kind of ideas and concepts in mind that you can feel empowered as an individual and know that even though you might be coloring outside of the lines with this countercultural choice and being a part of this movement, that the potential impact and outcome of that is incredibly positive. And you have the choice and you have the ability to do things that maybe weren't possible in another situation.
100%. And you could argue about like, oh, well, it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be money that makes political change. It shouldn't be money that actually can fix things in our society and the problems that we have. But the reality is today, it is money that does that. And if you want to change that being a thing, you have to make the money to make the impact, to change the fact that you need money to make that change, right? That's like the steps that come into play. And one of the things that astounds me as I learn about women in business and what has kept us from necessarily seeing the same success as men is how recent some of the laws and acts and things that give us that sort of equality, how recent so many of them were. Because we're not just battling like societal norms and societal expectations for genders, we're actually battling real things that prevented us from seeing success, and the impact it had on previous generations happened to us. So one of the things that people always talk about with women and men in the workplace, not so much with business ownership, is the gender wage gap, right? Today, there's different studies that give you different numbers, but generally speaking, people say women make 18 cents less on the dollar than men. It's about 82 cents to $1. And so women overall for the same work are making a little bit less money. It wasn't actually until 1963 that there was actual legal protection for equal pay for equal work. That's 1963. It was after my mother was born, right? So this is the generation before me was the first generation to have protection of equal pay. So that greatly affects women's earning potential and their general like life trajectory when we're second generation of people who had that protection. And even with that protection, we're still not seeing equal pay for equal work.
And I'm looking at a couple of stats in being an employee and moving into that like higher leadership role is that the share of women hired into leadership roles has increased by 3.6% in the last 6 years. 3.6%. That's not a lot. So when you're looking at leadership and executive teams from an employee or employed position, it's quite a bit lower. But when you look at the number of women-owned businesses, it's increased by 114%. So ultimately, women are opening up businesses more so, and it's demonstrated and shown that women founders actually lead more profitable companies. So from a leadership perspective, women do a much better job when it comes down to it. Yet, there are still tables in which women are not invited to sit at from a company and corporate perspective, which is why I feel like we see a lot of outliers now. For example, the founder of Bumble. She had originally co-founded Tinder, and then things didn't go so well. She branched out, and then she started Bumble. And now it's just like a unicorn of a company, and it comes to dating apps and incredibly successful. You look at Canva. She's a co-founder, so they technically co-created from the beginning, but the predominant face is a female founder, and that is, again, an incredibly successful business. What we're seeing, I think, is positive in that women are almost being pushed to do their own thing, and we're seeing women-led and women-founded businesses open up more and more and more on a day-to-day basis. But from a leadership and employee perspective, we're seeing much less progress when it comes to the pay gap, when it comes to equity in terms of maternity leave and how people are being treated in the workspace. Oh my gosh, I actually just have to comment on this. So, not naming any names or any entities, I actually had a friend who told their employer recently that they were pregnant and were promptly fired 2 weeks later.
I mean, that's illegal.
It's completely illegal. So it's a whole deal. But like that shit still happens. So do not tell me that things are equitable and fair in the workplace. And as a business owner, you can create those standards, right? Like she's working with a male boss and a male-led company who sees things a certain way. And this is the way that things are, or this is the tradition, or this is how it has to happen, or this is just how we've always done it. That type of thinking is going to keep us in the same negative loop and cycle over and over and over again. And when you think about yourself as a business owner, as a founder, so these are some of the like passionate things that you can get behind. I know that it can get difficult on a day-to-day basis of tasks and activities, and you're behind the computer and you're working and you're pushing forward and it's challenging and you're dealing with tech problems and you're struggling to create content on a consistent basis and it can feel so overwhelming. One of the things you can do is come back to some of these things that really ground you into your mission, into your why, into the vision of what it is that you're doing. Joanna and I share very strong feelings about how we want to impact people, how we want to lead, and how we want to create companies that are affecting change, even if not socially yet by, giving money or sponsoring or speaking out about large causes. We can still affect change on a small scale by providing a thriving wage, by creating a welcoming work environment that is also equitable and providing, if someone is going on maternity leave, we do not fire them. Thinking about all the ways in which you're affecting change, and as a woman, honoring that and honoring the relationships that you're creating through your business as a part of that process.
It's amazing how much goes down in the corporate world when it comes to men and women. When I had a baby and I came back from work, I had been back for a couple of months and I was on, it was a team-wide leadership call. I was a leader at that company and we were talking about a team meeting, that I would need to travel for was happening. My boss in the middle of that meeting, a female boss, by the way, said, "Oh, Joanna probably won't want to come because she just had a baby," on a leadership call in front of everybody. She said I wouldn't want to go. By the way, I did go and I did want to go and all of those things happened. But the point, making is as an entrepreneur, as a leader, when you have a team, you can make sure those things don't happen to your female employees and your male employees, by the way, right? You can set that company culture when it comes to maternity leave, how working parents are treated, how men and women are being treated, how men and women are being paid equally. You can affect the gender wage gap, not by necessarily going after legislation and that big picture, but you can do it by not letting it happen at your company and you paying men and women the same, you giving leadership positions to women, you giving leadership positions to people of color, right? You can make that change, even if it's just at your company, but you can do that, even if it's just your company. And if, you become a big company and you're competing against other companies, people will see that in you and will be like, well, they're doing it. Now I have to too. Even if they're only doing it for social reasons because you're doing it, you can set that precedent and standard and make a change when it comes to leadership, pay, comes to issues for women and people of color.
This makes me so excited because you just said it. Like, we're setting the precedent. We're in a totally new age. We're in this space of opportunity and change and progress and movement where companies are making changes and people are wanting to see changes. And it almost is this like synergistic feeding of opportunity, right? Because companies are starting to see that people care more about social movements. And obviously, there's still a huge population that doesn't care about anything and they'll still buy whatever. That is true. But there is a larger group of people who's starting to speak out more, who's starting to be more interested in eco-conscious packaging, who's starting to speak their mind about having a platform and a social movement, be a part of a company's story. Like, there's a lot that we're seeing that is created and impacted by the people, but then responded and the feedback is coming from the company. So again, it's kind of like one is making the other move forward. And it's kind of like this cyclical thing that I think is positive. And it's ultimately, I think, heading in the right direction. And we as change makers are setting that precedent. We can also talk about it on a large scale. I forget the founder, but he ended up cutting his salary. Now, of course, there's all this discussion about owner's draw. So there's still things like ways that people make money outside of that. But on paper, when you look at salary, he reduced his salary to $70K. And then he raised every single person in the company to 70K, which in his area or in the studies show that that's essentially a thriving wage. And he talked about it then on social media and what that looks like. And he's done follow-up content around that as well. So not only are you having that impact within your space, you have the opportunity to then share it on social media and reach hundreds, thousands, millions of people and talk about these things and share them and share that impact. And other people will, again, whether out of guilt or shame or, hey, we need to garner more talent, sometimes the motivation isn't as important as the actual thing that they're doing. So if they raise their wages, if they think about things a little bit differently, instead of having their C-suite be, I can't even tell you like what the exponential is, but instead of their C-suite being at the tens of millions of dollars and their, effective company employees being at the $30,000, actually bridging that gap a little bit and bringing it down. And so that happens through conscious collective, and that happens through conversation, and it happens through doing that in a real life setting.
Right. And I've heard people talk about like wanting legislation that requires that. That like says the CEO, the C-suite, and the lowest paid have to be within a certain ratio. Like people talk about wanting to pass that as legislation. Now, you could go that route of social change and saying, I'm going to get that legislation passed. But as a business owner, you could just do that. You could set a ratio for yourself. You could say, my lowest paid employee is not going to make less than X percent of what I make, to keep yourself honest and honorable and being mindful of people's time and what they're worth and all of those things, right? Like you can do that for your company. And that could be a way that makes other people follow suit. If you get big enough, that could make other companies be like, that's actually a great idea and a great plan. It does mean as a business owner, you might make less money. And that's hard, right? Like you want to make as much money as possible, but being honorable and good to your people and providing great jobs, I'll say your people will probably do a better job too. So it does benefit you in the long run to do that. And at the end of the day, so people say like businesses are just about making profits. And yes, businesses have to make a profit. That's true. Like you can't survive without making a profit. But you can also do it in a way, I'll say businesses need to make a profit, but they're also about making fantastic goods, creating jobs people want to do. It's great that I get to make money and do what I love and pay people a good wage to do what they love. That's fantastic. Could I maximize profits by paying people? Yes. Yep. I could. Or I could keep doing it the way I'm doing it. Great jobs for people that love their job, great services, and a decent wage for myself, right? Like that is what feels good.
Yeah, businesses are designed to make money. That is the point of a business. But also, we wouldn't have anything that surrounds us without businesses. Like businesses are in place and they have always been a part of our society and being a human. Like we need to engage with other things, right? Like even thinking back, I might be able to make socks, but I can't hunt. So I have to be able to trade in some way to be able to get meat on the table. Or I don't know how to build a home, but I can garden. And so like there's all these ways in which we've created over time that facilitate our lives. This phone that I'm recording on, I couldn't do that if there wasn't a business to build the phone and all of the components of the phone in terms of suppliers and resourcing. The computer, this microphone, all of the stuff surrounding me, the home that I'm in, like there are businesses surrounding all of us in terms of the economy, and that's how we live and that's how we function. And I think once we accept that as part of a way of being, it shifts the perspective, because I do know that there are a lot of people who get into that like, oh, it's such a capitalist society and everyone's just out to make money and businesses don't support us. Like, well, yeah, if you believe that, then you're never actually going to affect change. You're never going to shift the narrative. You're going to act accordingly, and that's not going to lead anywhere positive. So if you can see businesses as these thriving entities that either you're building or that you're supporting building, and they give back to society in some way, and there is a larger mission, there is a larger vision, and they do have values, then that changes the way that you approach the situation. And then as a business owner, yeah, you might be taking a certain salary, but there's a lot of other perks and benefits that come with either write-offs or, again, an owner's draw is separate, or investing that money in some other way. So it's not necessarily limiting you to reduce your salary to be equitable, again, to other people within the company. So being thoughtful about that, and obviously consult with someone who knows more about money, which would be an accountant or someone financially gifted. Don't take that for advice in terms of taxes or otherwise.
Like, this is not official financial advice because we are not qualified to give official financial advice. I love that you brought it back to money, though, because I want to talk a little bit about money. Because in order to start a business, you do need money. And that could mean a couple of things. I started my business with my skills, and I had a full-time job at the time. So I didn't take capital. I didn't have money I invested, but I had the privilege of having a job that made me enough money to support me that still left me time to start a business. So I was able to trade my skills for money, use that money to invest in my business and grow my business, right? But I recognize that that is a privilege that I had because I had access to money. I worked up a corporate ladder. I was able to save. That privilege I had that got me to where I needed to be able to start my own business. But access to money, access to finances is a huge part of that, being able to be a business owner. And I was sort of shocked when I learned the next stat I'm going to share. Legally, women were not guaranteed the right of a sole-owned bank account until 1974. So while women could get bank accounts in about the 60s, most banks required like their husband's signature on the account to give them a bank account. Some let them have it by themselves, but it wasn't actually like protected where banks couldn't do that, couldn't say no, couldn't require a husband's signature until 1974. Like, that is not that long ago. So what that means practically, if you were a woman and you had a bank account pre-1974, your husband had the same right to that money as you did. Now, if he was a great man, honest, was never going to take your money, you'd be fine. But say you were saving for something, that money wasn't yours. He could take it because his name is on the account. Just think about that. First of all, we're not going to talk about the effects of we're not going to dive into things like domestic violence and issues at home and all of that, right? But if you don't have access to money, to your own money, you're more prey to things like domestic abuse because you can't get out of a situation. But the same goes for business ownership. If you don't have access, ability to have money, you don't have the ability to become a business owner. Like, you need access to finances, access to money to do that.
Which really goes back to power and control. You can be controlled by money. I've actually had conversations about this recently with friends of, well, if I rely on him, and this just happens to be a situation of a heterosexual relationship, but obviously this could go either way with gender. But if I rely on this partner, this person, then I can't leave. I don't know what to do because what if I become too dependent and then I don't have any freedom, or I can't move, or I have no income? So really, honestly, there is so much power that comes with finances and with money and your ability to be confident in your choices. When I first learned a lot about this, again, if you haven't read it yet, We Should All Be Millionaires by Rachel Rodgers, she talks a lot about these data points and these statistics, and learning that 50 years ago, which for reference, I'm, 33, which is not that much older than me, doing the math, what is that, 17 years before I was born? Women didn't have access or the right to open a bank account, what Joanna just shared. That's huge. So 50 years ago, you wouldn't be able to start a business bank account on your own to be able to launch your idea. That's powerful. And so knowing that within such a short period of time, yes, we've had a lot of progress, but also we're still operating from certain limitations. And keeping that in mind when you think about these things, when you approach things, if you've ever felt like, I'm not good with finances, I can't manage money, I don't know where to start, this business is too overwhelming, I can't deal with it, or this is outside of my scope. Maybe it may be a skill set issue, but it also might just be an ingrained teaching or a societal expectation or norm that women aren't good with money, because that is what we're taught. That is what's been shared with us. That is what we've been told, is that women historically just shop and they just spend money instead of investing it, instead of using it in a smart way, instead of starting a business. So that is a societal norm that we're almost fighting against. So when you are a woman who takes ownership of your finances, who starts a business and does it in an intelligent way. One thing that I wish I'd done when I started a business was actually open a line of credit right away. Now, it's not to say that you want to get into debt to start your business, but knowing that you have that resource is important. Knowing that there are a lot of grants and opportunities out there are important. Knowing that you don't just have to feel like you have to bootstrap or figure it out again as a solopreneur, and only what you make is what you use for your business. Now, obviously, there's a lot of ways to go about that depending on the type of business that you're starting, but knowing that those things are out there and knowing that there's a lot of resources to support you to better understand finances, to better understand your options, to better look at your financial situation and say, hey, this is a good next step. Not being afraid of it and not being worried that, oh, this is outside of my realm, or I don't know what I'm talking about, or I don't understand these things. So now I'm embarrassed and I'm shameful and I feel guilty. So now I'm not going to deal with it. I wish that I had been a lot more upfront with my finances earlier when I started my business so that I would have done things differently and been in a better place by now.
And we're battling so much because we're battling these real legal things that kept us from seeing that success. We're battling society's expectation of men versus women. We're battling what our mothers did with money and what their mothers and their mothers, because we're all kind of modeling each other. So if you're taking that leap to be a business owner, the fact that you have a bank account, you have a business credit card, you have access to money to make decisions, to do those things, that is extremely countercultural. And that is pushing sort of that ceiling of where women can get even bigger because you're doing something that isn't as normal. You know, one thing, I'm in a strange life situation for a lot of reasons, but, you know, we've talked about on this podcast before, my husband's a stay-at-home dad. So I have like the sort of opposite, quote unquote, power dynamic of a lot of typical couples where the woman stays home, the man goes to work, has the money, has the bank accounts, all of those things. We're kind of in this opposite experience. And I always talk to him. I was like, I want to make sure that you have what you need. If you ever wanted to leave, you're not stuck. Like, if you want to leave, we'll make a plan. We will figure it out. Don't stay just because you can't leave. We have this conversation a lot. But one of the really funny things is society still doesn't get it. And when we bought our house, the loan is actually in my name because when we bought our house, my husband didn't have a lot of credit because he was a student at the time. The deed of the house is in both of our names, but the loan was in my name because we actually got a better interest rate at the time because of that, just the way it worked. I also had like weird business credit cards that made me have like a fantastic credit score. So it worked, just made more sense that way. So the deed is in both of our names, but the loan is in my name. So I get tons of scam mail to, you know, they're saying your loan is in danger, all of these things. When you buy a house, you get all of that. So they would send me mail about my loan, but it would be to my husband. And that is how I knew it was a scam. The deeds are like public records. So these scam people look at deeds for homes. They assumed he handled the finances, but I was able to catch them so greatly because I'm like, well, the loan's not in his name, must be spam, must be a scam, right? But these scammers are so ingrained in typical gender roles that their assumption when they saw both of our names on the deed, the assumption was the loan is in his name. It's his loan. And they were obviously wrong. That's the mentality, you know, because still today, the mentality is the man is the main owner of things. The man is the main holder of the finances. And if you're making the same or more than if you have a male partner, like if you're making the same or more than him, what you're doing is countercultural.
Yeah, I love it. And we're here for it. I think that women stereotypically, obviously, we're talking in generalities here in a big way, but there is data that shows that when women are invested in, when women have financial freedom, when women own businesses and actually take a stronger role in society, that there are positive impacts. There's a ripple effect that happens. The community is uplifted. The society improves. The economy gets better because what we tend to see, and again, these are generalizations and stereotypically, but men, when they acquire income and resources, they hoard it. When women acquire income and resources, they share it and they disperse it. And so we are talking about gender norms, we are talking about stereotypes, but there are things that we can lean into and that we can pull away from. So if there are things that you are not happy about and that you want to see change, then make that change. If there are things that we want to support and that we agree with, like, let's lean into that. We're identifying that these things are present. We are seeing change in business ownership. We're seeing change with employers, but we can be at the forefront as business owners. We can be at the forefront of that change. We can shift it. We can lead the movement. We can take ownership over what we are doing, the choices we are making, and how we are in ripple effect fashion impacting those that we either employ, the contractors that we work with, the presence that we have in the online space and how we're speaking about these things. And then, further, all of the ways in which we can impact our communities or socially. So I think that we're sitting in a very powerful place. And I believe that women are not just taking over, but women are the future of impact. And it's not to say that men don't have a place. Like, there's a great synergy that can happen there. But I think leaning into the more feminine quality of nurturing is exactly what our society needs.
I say get on board or move out of the way, because I think that there are positive qualities that women bring into leadership that men haven't done historically. When I've had like trolls and stuff, people come back to these arguments over, but like men need to be aggressive to like protect and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, we are in a modern society. Like brute force doesn't get us anywhere anymore. Yeah, I get that maybe in like prehistoric times when it was like kill the bear or be eaten. Okay, maybe you needed that brute force, but that's not where we're in anymore. Intelligence, soft skills, like the way you're successful today and can build a successful company is by being smarter and creating better teams. If you're smarter and you are good with your team and good at building teams, you can be successful. That's the skills it takes. Being stronger or bigger or more aggressive is not. And when you think of some of these, like, think of people like Elon Musk or like Jeff Bezos, I don't like think of them as like, wow, they're such an aggressive, overpowering man. That's not why they became what they are today. It was by being smart, hiring the right people, being innovative, right? And men and women, I think, are on equal footing when it comes to being able to have those skills.
And realistically, it's less about competition and more about collaboration. Like, the higher up people that we see and the more that I learn from them and the mentors that I listen to and pay attention to, they're always talking about like, yeah, you're not competing against anyone. Like, yes, you have competitors. That's a totally different conversation. But ultimately, you're in a space of collaboration. Like, you're in a space of doing what you do well, and you have unique selling propositions and you're positioning yourself different against quote unquote competitors. But realistically, you get to a place of collaboration where you're not even thinking about the competition anymore. It's more about how are we building this together, or how are we leveraging each other, or how are we taking up more space? And that definitely comes into play when you get into larger businesses with acquisition and mergers, because you have these people who, I was just listening to something recently, and it was about kind of like small businesses who maybe have this rivalry going or this competitiveness going. They may end up merging or having some sort of acquisition. And then it's like, well, what was all that competition for? We were just focusing or putting too much energy on the competitive quality of what we were doing and not enough on the collaboration and not enough on just, hey, what I'm doing in the first place and how I can grow as opposed to how I can beat the other person. And not to get political, but when we're looking at a world level of like brute force, like we still have wars, we still have issues. And what are they being caused by? Power, greed, and ultimately a scarcity and lack mindset. That's where it's coming from. And historical feelings of like generational trauma, probably. And there needs to be some healing there. But realistically, when women are in power, when women are in a place of leadership, when women have money, we make important change.
When I learned the next stat I'm going to share, I was kind of shocked. Because I was 2 years old. 2 years old when this happened. Women could not take out a small business loan without a male co-signer until 1988. It's 2 years old. That is not that long ago. And so there's funny stories. If you look into it, there's funny stories of women having their 17-year-old son as co-signers on their loan. Wild. And I think it's funny too, because there's that whole history of women, stereotype of women not being good with money. But in so many cases, when women were, housewives and all of those things, they were their family's accountant. They handled the budget. They made big decisions, right? They managed all of it. So to not let a woman take out a loan to start a business without a man to be her co-signer, it's wild. I think it's wild that it was so recent.
It is funny because we do actually have these counterintuitive ways in which we go about the world and the societal norms that we're talking about. It's yeah, women are bad with money, but actually women govern the household investments and purchases and actually manage the finances. It's funny what's being told to us consistently versus what's actually happening. And we need to be more aware of that. We need to pay attention to what are the ingrained belief systems? What are the thought patterns? What are the ways of being that I have just picked up from my environment, my parents, my society? And what's actually happening on a day-to-day and realistic basis? And how can I affect, change with either shifting the belief system or the pattern and really changing that narrative for myself and not feed into them, and then do something different and be different and take actions differently.
Yeah, because we have so many things coming at us that we can easily think things are true that aren't true. And just simple statements, simple way we talk, how we tell stories, the pronouns we use for different people in different jobs really do play a role in how we think about what we can achieve and what we could do. Actually, I was listening to a Alex Hormozy podcast this morning. I'm starting to actually really like him. I think initially I didn't like him, but the more I listen to him, the more I think he has some really good things to say. I know I don't know him personally, but I was really proud of him because he did this thing on his podcast. He was telling a story about hiring a salesperson, and he kept referring to the people he was interviewing all as he's. And I was like, come on, dude. You're really going to just assume your salespeople are all men? It kind of turned me off for a second. One of the reasons I was, I think, initially turned off by him as a creator. But somewhere down the line, he realized what he was doing and corrected himself and started using both he and she pronouns when it came to this elusive salesperson he was talking about. And I was like, way to go. Change is hard. And your language and the way you speak of things matter, especially when you're public facing. And if you always talk about salespeople or people in finance or people in tech as men in hypothetical situations, that makes an impact. That actually makes an impact in what society thinks is capable for those genders. And like we've said throughout this podcast, there are actual things that kept women from seeing certain success, being business owners, being seen in certain positions. But then there's also this society expectation and our mindset and what people say that affect that as well. So the last thing we will bring up, at least for this conversation today, is really interesting fact, is that in 2023, for U.S. startups founded exclusively by women, they only received 2% of the total capital invested by VC-backed startups. Only 2%. So fully women-founded startups only got 2% of funding, which is wild. And you can dig into those stats and see well, we're only 2% of the people who tried to get the funding. No, that's not true. We don't have, as female founders, the same access to capital as men. And there's been I think in 2024, those numbers are looking better. That I think it's grown by a certain percentage, but we know money is power. Capital can help you grow your business. And if we have less access to capital, that gives us less access to grow our businesses.
You may not even be considering VC or any type of funding, angel, traditional loans, whatever that looks like for your actual business. But this is a really important stat to pay attention to because the rate at which women are opening businesses and the fact that I think it's 42% of businesses are actually owned by women. The fact that we have such large numbers with women-owned businesses employing around 10 million workers, with women-owned businesses taking up I don't know, 23% of the revenue when it comes to money generated by businesses, that 2% for VC funding is so small. It's not necessarily that women aren't going after those opportunities. It's because there is a stigma around money and women. And that is changing and that is shifting. And again, we're finding that women and female founded companies have better leadership, better profitability, and more success than sometimes those founded by men. And so I think that's changing. And I think what happened in Silicon Valley with the collapse of the bank there, money is not being lended out or VC is not being invested as haphazardly as maybe it was before, where you're looking at like Series A, Series B, Series C, whatever, like those rounds of funding, just pumping millions and millions of dollars into these tech startups that have a really great idea, but these huge inflated teams and they're not profitable for years and years and years. In any case, we could get into that conversation. But realistically, it's still just a huge gap and it's something that we're looking to change. And as a business owner, as someone who's generating income and has the opportunity for high profit margins within your business because you create those standards for business, services, for products, for whatever it is that you're delivering on, right? You have the opportunity to move forward and then take that income, take that profitability and reinvest back. So actually starting your own VC fund or finding VC funds that specifically support female-founded companies. There's a lot of opportunity there to take your money and put it in a good place. And that's what I envision for myself in the future. And that's where I want to be. I want to continue to make lots of money so that I can reinvest back in especially women-owned businesses, especially women of color who are making an impact and need access to funding in order to do that. Because you may be a coach, you may be a creator, and that's great. And the barrier of entry financially is very low. But for a lot of us who are looking at creating larger companies, physical product businesses, again, if you take TBH, that takes money up front in order to do so. And it's okay that it does take money. So knowing that there are resources to support you in finding that and that you as an individual can create that for others.
Thank you, everyone, for listening to this episode. We're really excited to share our thoughts, our feelings on this. And if you are listening to this, you are a woman, you are a business owner, know that you are part of the good fight. What you are doing every day, simply using your business bank account, is just a testament to what women can do. Your mother, your grandmother did not have the same access that you have, and you're putting your mark on this generation and on future generations to come. And I encourage you to keep going. And if you haven't joined our Facebook group, we have the link in the comments. We'd love to hear from you, help support your business, help get the word out at what you are doing. We'd love to hear from you. So join us in there so we can learn more about what you and what impact you're having on the world.
Thanks for tuning in. Find the link in the show notes to join us in the Her First Collective, a free Facebook group to discuss the podcast, ask questions of our guest experts, and network with a group of female entrepreneurs who value collaboration over competition.
Please subscribe, share, leave a review, and be sure to catch our next episode. What is one thing you can do today to prioritize you in business and life?